I deserve to be poked and prodded.
We'll get there.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with it.
Welcome to the Inside the Box podcast, brought to you by Black Box Investigations and Appen Media Group. Dive into local issues important to the North Atlanta community, from politics and education to business and crime. Hear the story behind the story that you won't hear, read, or see anywhere else.
Welcome to another episode of the Inside the Box podcast. I'm your host, Hans Zappen, and we had a really informative show this week with Alpharetta City Councilman Ben Burnett, where we talk a little bit about his journey into politics and then dive into some of the inner workings of Alpharetta government. He touches on his desire to see elected officials more transparent to their constituents, money in politics, and, of course, Twitter. It's some really insightful stuff that I think you'll enjoy, so check it out. And if you have any feedback you'd like to share with me, feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks. Thank you for tuning in to the Inside the Box podcast. Excited about our interview today. On the show, we have Alpharetta's newest councilman, Ben Burnett. Ben, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Hans. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. I have no idea who put you up to this, and I don't know what the
you in part put me up to it.
You know, I'll taunt you out there in social media every once in a while. When I saw that Donald Mitchell and Jim Gilvin were your two first guests, I was like, I can't be more boring than that.
Oh, goodness.
I'm not taking shots at their policy making, but
Ben is smiling, Donald and Jim, all in good fun. But I want to have our listeners learn a little bit more about you. So whether they voted for you, whether they didn't vote for you, you're still the rookie councilman on Alpharetta City Council.
For now. And
I think there's still a lot we can learn about you. So tell us a little bit about your introduction to Alpharetta in general. How long have you lived here? When did you start to get really just more involved?
I worked in commercial construction sales from 2005, about the time I got out of college, until 2007. And I was working in Birmingham, and they moved me to Atlanta at the time. And so my first introduction to Alpharetta was in high school. We were some of the high school kids that would go to 722 and go to Bible study. And I know for any of you who have been around here for any length of time, I know we were hated and we were banned from going to that because we were not old enough, but we still did. And that was honestly the first introduction I ever got. We drove down Pleasant Hill, State Bridge, Old Milton Parkway, to go to that at North Point Community Church. And then when I went to college, we'd come back and we would still come and go to activities over here every once in a while. But Alpharetta in 2003 is not 15 years later.
Mm-hmm. Where'd you go to college?
Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. Go Bulldogs. I'm one of the few people that will willingly admit it's not easy, but I'm a very passionate Samford basketball supporter.
Okay.
And there's not many of us. It was
a loyal few.
And I understand that everybody loves Alabama or Georgia or Georgia Tech, and it's like I like all of those things as well, but I'm true to my school.
Okay. I respect that.
And after I started delivering commercial construction supplies off Providence Road to the Seeger Group, and they were building a neighborhood called the Haystack, and I thought, this is such a beautiful area. I don't know where my life will lead. And in fairness, Alpharetta, that's Milton. I don't know where my life will lead, but if I could ever live in here, I would absolutely take that shot, because it still had it felt rural, but you were very close to things. And those people that, live so close to Alpharetta on acreage are so fortunate, because you have the amenities that are incredible. So in 2010, my wife and I got married, and I was working for AT&T in Birmingham, and it was just hell. It was miserable. I was 27 when Lindsay Ann and I got married in Birmingham, and I was working for AT&T, and it was very difficult. Just the timing of getting married, trying to get a career off the ground. It was difficult all the way around. I knew that we wanted to move back here because all of our parents, in some form or fashion, mine and hers, both wound up living in Atlanta. And it's such a, to have children and to have your parents down the road. It's worth its weight in gold, I would tell you, whether you live in Alpharetta or not. And if you're evaluating on going home so your parents can spend time with your kids, you should do it.
Yeah.
Figure it out.
I'll second that.
And it's just, you just don't get the time back. And I knew that nothing lasts forever. I had such a wonderful relationship with my grandparents. It was like, that was something I had to do. And I'm thankful for it every day, especially as I've grown a career in technology here. I've done pretty well for myself and for my family. And Lindsay has the opportunity to stay home and raise kids, and she picks up shifts at the hospital. And it's a great place to raise a family.
So you transferred here?
I did not. I just picked. We were to the end of a lease in our apartment.
Okay.
And we moved. I found a job, the first one that would hire me. It wound up being the best thing to ever happen to me. I commuted down to 75 and 285 for several years. And I knew what Alpharetta was doing around technology, it wasn't an if, it was a when. And so I would candidly take far less money to continue to work out here, because for those of you who get on 400 every day, find a career in technology, because we got tons of jobs.
Some who are probably listening to this right now.
I hope you're listening. I hope you're sitting in traffic, and I hope you're wondering, why do I do this? And I hope you get on LinkedIn tomorrow and you start looking for jobs out here, because it's a fabulous place. It is not in a city where everybody sits in traffic for everything that goes downtown. It's so nice to commute to North Point Parkway and Kimball Bridge, and it's 3 miles or 4 miles, and
yeah,
it can still take you 20 minutes, but it sure doesn't take you an hour and a half.
Yeah. So what was your first foray into just sort of the Alpharetta political scene?
My first foray into the Alpharetta political scene was the sharp development that backed up to Harrington Falls and also backed up to my neighborhood, Mayfield subdivision. And there were several others. I'm not sure the Garden District was one of them, but they were pretty active. Mm-hmm. And I saw, it was the first time, I just wanted to know who was going to be, when you see yellow signs up, I didn't know anything about it. And so I wrote everybody, Jim Gilvin and Chris Owens responded to my concerns, and at that point I was still rational.
So you emailed them to find out more.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Kind of your first.
My wife and we were expecting our first child, and I just wanted to know how that process worked. I was very sensitive to development because I grew up in Gwinnett County and went to Parkview High School, and I saw that community fundamentally change because it didn't have the oversight it deserved. And I saw my parents' house they bought for about $250,000 in the early 90s become worth almost $500,000, and then today they'd probably be lucky to get the low threes out of it. It's a 5,000 square foot, 4-sided brick house, and because they've had very little city planning, I'm sensitive to it. And so
you emailed them.
I emailed them.
They both emailed you back?
They did, and DC Aiken, Clears Day, and Chris Owens came and met with our subdivision. And I remember calling Chris before they were voting and saying, what do you think? And they were like, well, it's single family residential, and they've worked with us a lot, and I don't think that their demands are unreasonable, and I intend to vote for it. And then they did. And so it wasn't that I was passionate one way or the other. I wanted to know. And I would tell anybody listening to this, when you see yellow signs, you should ask questions. I'm honestly a little bit disappointed that, and I've only sat through 2 or 3 public hearings at this point, but I mean, I would ask. I'm just that way.
So for our listeners who don't know, what are these yellow signs that you see?
Yellow signs are when you're coming up, you're asking for a change to a comprehensive land use plan, meaning it's too tall, it doesn't fit the density per acre, and it can be it could be something as small as you have the right to build 40 feet, but I need 42 to make it work. You're asking for 2 feet. Well, you should. I think people should choose to ask.
So your first introduction to the whole scene was centered around an issue, more specifically a development that was important to your family, important to your property.
And I don't listen. Our neighborhood was. I bought my house for right over $200,000, and the economy couldn't have been worse. But I still chose. I wanted to know. Mm-hmm. And anybody who's driven through Tom Sharp's development there, I mean, they're not $200,000 houses. And those people in Harrington Falls were just asking for lots that backed up to theirs that resembled what they had, and they didn't get that. And I thought that at that point it was still just math. I didn't think that it was total. I didn't think their requests were unreasonable, although I didn't have a legitimate stake because I have a half acre, and they did. Mm-hmm. And I thought a little bit more could have been done. Not that you wanted to stop the development, but I thought those people that were directly west of that development had a right to be upset about it. Now, the other side of that coin says, even if they join up and the lots match perfectly, are you still mad? And the answer to that's probably. But I like to think I have more genuine opinions than that. I just really wanted to get to know it. It was really neat to watch Tom come do a question and answer session at the old city hall. It was neat to watch it go through planning commission. It was, by the time I had talked to Chris, I'm sure he remembers that. He may not. He gets lots of calls. You can choose to let something happen to you, or you can choose to advocate. I didn't, and that's a byproduct of my life in general, and I'm not sure it's always positive, but it doesn't change the fact that it's like my wife knows well enough. If you say something and I see like some sort of injustice or wrong in something, like I'll go after you.
Sure.
And I probably shouldn't always, but it's a weakness. I'm not going to lie. I'm not scared to fight you.
So it's a big leap from asking questions about the development next door to running for city council.
It is a tremendous.
So what happened next?
So I spent several years I spent a year and a half or 2 years on the Recreation Commission with your wife, mm-hmm. Christina, who is awesome and did a great job. And I honestly learned a lot from her because she spent a lot of time with the AYSA advocating for their best interest. And that was really cool to see. That's where change is made.
Yeah.
I can honestly tell you that the Planning Commission was a lot of fun, but I didn't do nearly as much good there as I did. If you go out to North Park today, and I won't take 100% credit for this, but I'll take some, as there was some leftover money in the budget. And if you go out to North Park and you sit under a shade structure, it was because I called Mike Perry and I said, these people are the AYSA is willing to meet us halfway if we'll put shade structures. He goes, makes sense to me. It gets hot out there. Mm-hmm. And it was,
he's a no nonsense kind of guy.
It was a third, I think it was $30,000. Mm-hmm. And if you go out there today, I still think it every time I go out there. It's like, how much better are people who are going to watch their dads and play softball at night, spend time as a family, or your little girl on Saturday to do that. I don't think that should be lost on anybody. I think that should motivate people to want to be involved.
Yeah. So how long were you on Parks and Rec?
Probably a year and a half. And then slot was open, and by that point I had a really good relationship with a lot of people in Windward, and Gilvin saw an opening sitting as an alternate on the Planning Commission, and he just wanted somebody that wasn't scared to cause trouble. And
you had probably gotten to know him because he was the liaison for Parks and Rec?
I did.
Okay.
And you just sit there after meetings and you talk to him. I talked to him. I talked to Chantel Beach. And I remember those conversations. I talked to your wife, and you just get to learn about Alpharetta and what makes it.
So from Parks and Rec to Planning Commission, then you make the leap to running for office. What was that decision for you?
I determined, it was one night last year after we had seen DeVore Road, and it was a mixed-use development go through DeVore Road. And I knew that Mayor Belisle was the closing attorney on a mixed-use development. And instead of recusing himself in public, he chose to not show up. And I thought that was so lazy. And if it didn't At some point in these 4 years, I have to recuse myself from something, and I hope I have the stones to sit there and tell you that I can't do this because I work for a technology company that may or may not profit directly from a deal. And there's a level of integrity that I believe you signed up for. And taking the easy way out by not showing up was not it. And I just decided that night, I said, if nobody's going to go challenge anybody, and it's nothing against Councilmember Merkel or Jason, but nobody shot bullets at those guys. And I just said, by God, if nobody goes to put their name on the ballot next time, we're going to have a conversation. And what was really funny was that because I decided to and I went the last day and just picked a race that I thought would be the most favorable to me. But the truth is that if my opponent hadn't run, somebody had a race to run. And I remember talking to Brad Sturgeon, and I think he had actually told me that you were thinking about just going to put your name on the ballot. And you know what? And I was totally content to spend $5,000, which I would have fundraised in droves to get back, just to be content to lose. Mm-hmm. I'm a guy who'd go about things the right way, and I wasn't going to throw stones at anybody. But I had sat in enough planning commission hearings and HOA meetings when I sat down with Academy Park to kind of tell them how something worked. I said, look, if you get to a Monday night city council meeting and you see an attorney down front, the development has 4 votes. That's how it works. And they're like, well, what do you mean? Do you mean that they don't care if you advocate for it? I'm telling you, they have 4 votes. Think about all the meetings that you've ever been, because Academy Park had been involved in every step of the way downtown, good or bad, because it was an existing subdivision. They've seen Alpharetta grow like nobody else has seen Alpharetta grow from a downtown perspective. And they felt ignored. It's like, my gosh, if people that live downtown don't know how this works, how does anybody else know how it works? And they were organized. They came out and they would write letters to the planning commission. And so I had that in my back pocket. I was like, you can come beat me, but you're going to have to work.
No, I want to be clear on this because I think something you said is probably going to raise some questions for people. So your inspiration for running, was it, I'm sure there was more to it than development on DeVore, but
sure.
So that was the trigger
that was where I'd mulled it for 6 or 8 months. Since I was put as an alternate on the planning commission, that was when you really got to see how applications came through, and you got to see by the time it gets to the paper and they advertise, and there's like a 90-day, and there's applications that I know are coming, that I've known are coming for 6 months, that still choose to wait for 6 more. I don't know what motivates them to do that or not to do that, but it's interesting. And so that was the night when Chris Owens had to fill in as the mayor because he didn't want to recuse himself. That was the night where I was like, I'm running. And if nobody else is going to run, I'm going to go pay the $450 or $400 or whatever it is, and I'm going to make him beat me.
So you drew Ben Easterling as your opponent.
I did, and I honestly, if I had known that he was going to run against Mike Kennedy, who I have a really good relationship with, I'd have been content to leave it alone. But there was a backroom deal that was cut, and Kennedy didn't go issue a press release or say anything about not running. And it was obvious because 5 minutes after qualifying started, he went in there to do it. And when Kennedy hadn't registered by the end of midday, the second day, I was like, we just figured it out. And so we waited, and people would call. Jason Binder would call. He didn't know
if anybody else
was going to do it.
Right.
And so the fact that as an American, I have a fundamental problem with that. And you're talking to a guy who may not run for office again in 4 years. I have a fundamental problem with playing with the ethics of an election.
So you felt like he should have been more upfront about his intentions to step down?
100%. Everybody else in North Fulton did. Nobody else had a problem. You know, on some level, you can take deniability, plausible deniability. Well, I told people if they asked me, dude, is that the right thing to do for 65,000 residents? And I think the answer to that question is no. And so I honestly was content. If Kennedy was going to run against Ben Easterling, I was content to run against Chris Owens. And I was content to lose because I believe that those guys had a record. I like Ben. When he called me, and I, after I said, there's a place for you here, man. If you would like to continue to serve, I'm sure he'd corroborate the story. Let me know. I'd love to. Alpharetta needs good guys, and he's a good guy. He didn't say anything derogatory about me in any way, shape, or form. I just felt differently than he did. And I have a lot of respect for him as a man. He takes great care of his family. He's been around a long time. There were plenty of people that supported me that I know are friends of his. And I'm sure that I have plenty of friends that, John Hypes is a friend of mine who I respected him a lot, as difficult as it is for somebody to tell you that they're going to support somebody because there's a 25-year relationship. Like, dude, I'm sitting on the other side. I get it now. But I was like, man, that's tough. And that's a hard thing to get over. And it's, he knows that. And he was I have a ton of respect for him for being forthright. And he said, Ben, I want you to know that I just hope you choose to, regardless of how this goes, stay involved. And just because I wouldn't support you now doesn't mean I wouldn't support you in the future. And that's a man, to a man, that's a cool thing to say.
John is actually running for city council now.
I've heard he's involved.
We have contested races. I want to get into a bunch of other stuff.
Can I take responsibility for some of that?
Sure. We'll give you some credit.
You can't compete, and Kennedy will give me a hard time about this. You can't compete in the marketplace of ideas if there's no marketplace for ideas. And right, wrong, or indifferent, I'm thankful to anybody that it's hard. You've done it. It's hard. My wife hopes that I never choose to do it again. And you learn a lot. You learn that it's a lot bigger of a universe than you think it is, and you have control over what you say and what you do, and that's about it.
Well, so that relates to my next question. So we've got 3 contested elections here in Alpharetta. Let's do 3 takeaways on what you learned to run a successful and winning campaign. What advice would you give to anybody to win a campaign?
You have to know who's going to vote. You have to figure out what your message is to the people who are going to vote, and you have to hit as many of those doors and have physical contact with them as much as possible.
So it's data, have a clear message, and work your butt off.
And raise money. Eamon, I laugh. Eamon Keegan, who's become... So what's funny is Eamon and I run... He would be a great guy to have on a podcast because he just knows everything about... He knows everything about Alpharetta. And he's worked some really large races. So he has a great deal of experience. But he told me, he said, you're supposed to do 2 things as a candidate. Talk to people and raise money.
How much money did you raise?
I raised between $11,000 and $12,000. I spent right under 17. I was shocked. I'll tell you the most humbling thing about it is when you knock on somebody's door and you go to your account later that night and you see they gave you $25.
That's cool. Yeah.
It's cool. It only happened twice, but it was really cool. And I can tell you who both of them are.
Okay.
But it is, it's tough. I knew that I couldn't compete on a playing field where you had to reach 12,000 people. But I knew I wanted to compete because I didn't feel like I was wrong. I don't feel anybody that gets in politics. I don't think my opponent, Ben Easterling, felt like he was wrong.
Talk to me about your campaign messages. Give me a little rundown what your platform was. What kind of progress have you made so far? Any lessons learned there? So
I retained Eamon for a couple $100 in July. I said, I just want to take you off the battlefield. And he said, I have one rule before we get into anything else. And I said, what's that? He goes, you can't run against Donald Mitchell. And I said, okay. I said, that's your only rule? I said, well, why? And he goes, I've just got a lot of history there. And I said, to be honest with you, I think Donald would be the hardest one to beat because he'd work. He knocked on my door several years ago. But neither here nor there. I crafted my campaign. So Eamon also helped run Aaron Barlow's campaign. So they had paid for a really expensive poll. The 18
and
months.
Aaron Barlow ran against Brandon Beach, state senator.
And they spent, I think, collectively over $1 million for a state senate race. Like 10 years ago, you could run for Congress on $1 million in certain parts of the country. So I think that's sad. And it's not that I begrudge anybody for being able to pump it in or raise that money, but I'm not sure that's what our forefathers anticipated. No. But the other side of that is, so he knew really well what Alpharetta thought about the landscape at large. And Tip O'Neill said it. I've heard Katie Reeves say it. All politics is local. It is the truth. And I identified who was going to vote. It was 80% of Alpharetta is registered Republican. That's not across the board, but that was who was going to vote in my election. Mm-hmm. I figured out how old they were. I figured out what race they were. And I figured out how to craft a message that would get the 20% Democrats. And so there was nothing that we did for months that was on accident.
So how much would you say your platform was tailored to your audience, and how much of it was what Ben Burnett felt deep down inside?
2/3 of it was what I felt deep down inside. And I am a guy who will openly tell you I voted in a Democrat primary. I didn't vote in a Democrat primary, but I voted for Obama the first time. And so I voted for him. I think I voted for John Edwards, which is almost shameful to admit now, probably 4 years prior. And the truth is that at some point I'll vote for another Democrat. I don't know who it'll be. We can get into that later.
Sure. So you had your campaign platform.
I knew people were really frustrated with downtown. Mm-hmm. I knew that because I had gone to the Academy Park. When I had gone to the Academy Park HOA meeting or POA meeting and talked to them, and they were like, we just don't understand. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's no education process between the public. And it's largely will shape what I do for the next 4 years. It's one thing to read it in the paper, but the paper, and it's no offense to them, they tell the story after the fact, or they tell the story beforehand. But that's the 10th chapter in a 10-chapter book. And so they print, very few people read what zoning applications are going to go up. And this is something I would like to change. I want to help. I want to get with you guys to try to facilitate that, because I just feel like an informed population makes better decisions. And I knew that people were really frustrated with downtown. I was really frustrated with the way the city center.
We'll talk more about that. What kind of frustrations?
I knew that Alpharetta had voted over 80% to bond a land transaction in downtown Alpharetta and to build a library and to create green space. And I told Mike Kennedy this when he sat down to talk to me before the Planning Commission. I think he just wanted to secretly know who was out there in the blogosphere responding to stuff online when he talked to me. And his response was, well, governments buy and sell land all the time. He's not wrong. They do. But Alpharetta would have never voted for a city center at over 82% that was going to include 160-something apartments. There's not a corner of the city you could have sold that. And then they did the land transaction for between 30 and 40 cents on the dollar for current market value. I thought that was pretty lazy. And then, at certain points, guys running for higher office like the mayor have utilized that developer to raise money for their current races. And there's just some of that stuff that's not illegal, but I just have a problem with the ethical makeup of choosing to do something like that. That was the night I got really interested in running for higher office. I didn't have any office before. That was the night I got interested in running for local office.
Sure.
And I knew that I could run a race in Alpharetta based solely with dollars from friends and neighbors. And there's very little commercial special interest, which I hate.
Right.
And so I was passionate. I went to war against that. Everything I did centered around the message, because I knew, it's traffic on Academy over towards Webbridge has largely deteriorated since then. So those people in Windward were mad. Mm-hmm. And I knew that they always voted very heavily one way or the other. And I was going to make dang sure that they were not voting the other way. Because the truth is if you carry them, you carry that pocket of 2,400 homes, it's hard to lose.
Yeah.
And you can be mad at me for tailoring my campaign that way, but I played to win.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't make apologies about. I was fun because I was the only thing on the ballot, so I could go scorched earth if I wanted to. And some people think I did.
Well, and I want to skip ahead a little bit there.
Go for it.
Because we got a lot to cover. What was the percentage you ended up getting of the vote?
Eamon always gives me a hard time because I had 2 or 3 votes get thrown out. I always say 60 and he says 59.6, but I just tell people I won by 3 touchdowns.
We'll round up. 60% is an overwhelming victory, and you were sworn in January.
I was sworn in January.
So you've been doing the council thing now for 2.5 months?
Yes.
So what's
different?
What's different? Let's start out with what's different.
What is different is that there are, as I alluded to earlier, that public hearing and those decisions that get made 3 or 4 Mondays a month, that's the 10th chapter in a 10-chapter book. Everything else is very thoroughly thought through. I'm covering public works and the CID, as well as technology and human resources right now with just 4 of us. So it's a little bit unfair to the residents that you have your public works. Listen, if I make motions for roads that I know very little about, and regardless of who the mayor is in this special election, I am sure that neither of them would put me back over that. And that's probably You're
okay with that.
But I'm going to take the opportunity. I went to the CID meeting. I ate lunch with the people over at the CID today because I value being good at it. And it does you and your family no good if I just sit there and rubber stamp yes and can't ask questions. And I don't think that there's anything, inherently wrong with public works in the CID. I just don't understand how, Pete Sasevich over in public works, he's one of those guys, if you send him an email as a resident, he will write you back. Mm-hmm. And you better know what you're talking about because he does. And I have a lot of respect for the whole staff, by and large, is like that. Tom Harris over in finance. And these are things that you guys never get to see. Tom knows where every nickel in this city is buried. And, it's a humongous budget. Huge. And there's a lot of factors that go into it, like sales tax revenue, T-SPLOST, bonded money, and then property taxes. You've got a lot to be proud of. There's not very many cities. We have fundamental arguments over policy or density in residential areas and a comprehensive land use plan. I think each of the 7, regardless of who they are, value the AAA credit rating by 2 agencies. It allows us, I think the last time we bonded money, it was at 2% and change, which happens nowhere. Like, that was free. We should have probably bonded more. Mm-hmm.
What has surprised you so far about the way council operates or actions or responsibilities you've had to take on?
I can tell you the thing that is different in this time where there's 4 of us is it forces – I talk to everybody several times a week. And there are relationships that I will carry moving forward to a body of 7 that will be different because of if this special election scenario hadn't carved itself out, I have nowhere to hide. As the guy who shouldn't know as much as the other guys, I still can't hide. Mm-hmm. I have to be at a meeting on Monday night to vote or we can't have a meeting. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's scary.
Everybody's got to be there.
Everybody has to be there. And so I spend time talking to Dan Merkel, who's running community development, and I think he's done a really good job. And regardless of who the mayor is, I think he's done a great job of meeting with staff. And if this situation hadn't happened, I'd never have that relationship with him. I have an immense amount of respect for Donald Mitchell because I don't know that he was really taken seriously until I got elected. And I'll be 100% honest with you. I told Donald that if he would stay out of my race in public, I didn't care how he voted, I would vote for him for mayor pro tem because I knew that this was out there and I knew that this was his opportunity to lead. And that guy has so far exceeded my expectations. The first thing he did when he's acting mayor is he went in there, and you guys should know this, and you should send him an email. He went in there with a survey that every employee had to take. And it was about the benefits, the culture, what can we do to make your life better? Because we can address things right now that will be entirely too political to address after May. And that's separate of who the mayor is. Mm-hmm. The level to which that guy cares about Alpharetta is just staggering. He would make an excellent mayor. And I have plenty of...
Sounds like an endorsement.
I have plenty of philosophical disagreements with him. But he's willing to... The thing that has changed from January and February to now is that the four of us have an attitude that we want things to be done in public. And three of us have kind of always felt that way. And so it's really neat to have the opportunity to do that. I got every single one of those guys complimented me on the ability to make myself accessible to have a community meeting. And they're like, that's never happened.
Well, and I want to ask you about that, but what kind of things are you talking about, stuff that's not being done in public?
I think that, and I've only sat in 2 executive sessions, and you can discuss real estate, legal matters, and personnel with the city at a certain level. And I think that at certain points there's been more done behind closed doors. Until the early part of February, we didn't know when David was going to choose to resign to run for Secretary of State. And there was an active plot to make him. You had to leave 90 days notice so that we could host an election for free, which would otherwise cost the taxpayers here $100,000. And we sat in a closed door meeting in Athens, and he hemmed and hawed about when he was going to resign, and it was his prerogative to do so. That's 100% the truth. He was inclined to do whatever he wanted to do, but the court of public opinion and the court of law are very different things. And there were some of us that just let him know, you can do whatever you want in public, but so can we. And I was willing to, when it became clear he didn't want to talk about his intentions as a guy who wanted to run the state's elections with, after what had happened in the fall with trying to collude to keep an election from taking place. And I don't know that he was entirely responsible for it. That's a lot to put on one person. But there are plenty of better ways to go about. Everything should be done in the open. The residents of Alpharetta should have never not known what the election dates were going to be. And so when we sat in Athens at our retreat and he didn't want to make his intentions known, I sent an email that Monday and I said, you can do whatever you want to do, but you can either address it and take the high road, and I'll support that and let that happen, or I'm going to bring it up in reports. And by the way, Sam, who's our attorney, you're copied, so be ready to talk about it. And
what they say?
David had sent word to me that he had every intention of taking the high road, and I knew he would. I knew he would do the right thing, but I knew he was getting a lot of pushback because he wanted the mayor's election to take place in November because he thought that, and the majority at the time thought that it would give their chosen candidate a better opportunity with more votes. They also wanted City Center to be completed. And so that's fine. But if you didn't want to finish your term, which you had every right legally to finish your term and wait to run, then what's the difference of 2 weeks? Playing games with an election is serious business.
So you think that the 4 remaining council people are more cognizant about being more open and transparent with decision-making processes like that? Yes,
100%. I can tell you just from the conversations that we have to have in executive session, it stops with where our legal ramifications begin and end. And then it's like, we can talk about anything else, but this is where this line is today. And if we're going to talk about the rest of this, it needs to be done in public. That's the right thing to do.
So who's your go-to person, elected or staff-wise, that you go to voice concerns like that?
Bob Regis. Oh my gosh, that guy. I feel
He's the city manager.
he is the city administrator, manager.
Administrator might be the...
I called Bob after we had that meeting in Athens, and I just told him I felt that it was unethical about when we were going to host the election and what the mayor's intentions were. And I just said, I honestly felt like we didn't do the right thing in public, and that when we made the staff leave the room and the door was closed, and I just felt like I was participating in something that wasn't wrong, but it wasn't done the right way.
Did you say anything at the time?
I didn't think it at the time until it was over. I don't put that at his feet. He does a phenomenal job. I just didn't realize I was complicit until later. And I don't think that'll ever happen again. I was very upset. I mean, if you see me disagreeing with you, I'm coming from a long way off. I'm not closed door, this is how this is going to be. And when nothing got resolved that night, I was like, well, okay, I'll do it in public. And, I don't know that I'd take it back, but it sure was a heavy hand I played.
It worked.
It worked, but I still don't.
It's not the way you would have wanted it to.
It didn't have to be like
right.
that. But I'm glad that the mayor chose to do the right thing.
All right, let's switch gears on you a little bit. Talk about, you're an active Twitter user. You had a recent, or I guess a couple of recent spats with Mark Toro.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that. How'd that come up?
So I have a ton of...
And I guess for our listeners, I should say Mark Toro is a pretty influential property developer in the North Atlanta area.
And he has made the largest private investment in Alpharetta in its history. And he's responsible for Avalon. And he's not scared to let you know he's responsible for Avalon. And candidly, if I built it, I'd probably be worse. And he chooses to advocate for a candidate in the Alpharetta elections, and he's more than fine to do so. But when you get to a place where I feel like you're negligent, I don't mind to throw down, and I don't mind to tell the whole story. And I think that he's done a great job. I don't know that he's always been a great actor in the city, especially recently. And I think that's a criticism, and I think it's fair. So when you're hurling stones at elected officials that I've served with and that serve as mentors of mine, don't step in the squared circle if you don't want to get hit. And I have no problem giving him credit for creating a wonderful development. My favorite restaurant, maybe in the Southeast, is Oak Steakhouse, and he brought it here. Avalon is unique, and it's unlike anything else that exists maybe anywhere, and especially in Georgia currently. But you can't buy class. And nice suits don't dictate the way you should treat people. And, I don't care how much money you have and how much power you wield. When you put things out there that are intended for harm, I'm not fine with that.
So you stand by everything you tweeted?
Yeah, I don't. If you come at, and I get it. I'm a Jim Gilvin loyal friend, and it's hard to sit there and defend yourself when you're running for a race. And there are people that tried to poke at me for months while I was running. And it's just not smart. But, I said it then and I said it now. If you want to talk to me about playing in the NFL, Ben, dude, you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. And I hope that as we develop North Point LCI and North Point C's redevelopment, I hope he's one of the guys that comes to the table. But I think he knows that about me. And I think I know he's a great guy. And he's one of a handful that has done more for human trafficking in Georgia than anybody. So I don't approach him like he's a criminal, but that doesn't mean you're always right.
Someone else I've heard of has kind of the if you're going to hit me, I'm going to hit you back harder mentality on Twitter. Anybody else that remind you of? Do
you reference the Donald?
The Donald?
Anybody
else ever say that to you?
No, and Donald Mitchell will tell me otherwise because, and the truth is that he and Jason Binder know that if they have good policy that's going to be met with resistance, I'm pretty handy with, I'm good at the heavy hand. And
so you think it's useful? It's a tool.
it is absolutely a tool. And I don't necessarily, I have a ton of, the thing, what's funny is Kennedy, who would have, probably take very little exception with what I said and totally understand. He may not like it that I said it in public, and he's right and fine to do so. But he's another guy that he's gotten a little more vocal since he left office. He's
had some things to say to you too.
Yeah, I don't. Mike, myself, you, Toro's one. Toro takes nothing personally, and I respect. I don't either. Like as long as you're not sitting there talking about my family, dude, I'm elected. I signed up for some of it, and I'm not going to sit there and berate you. What's funny is that after that whole thing happened, I wound up with Toro's phone number. So I hope that that's a guy who chooses to be involved in Alpharetta, and I hope I genuinely mean that.
So during your campaign, you proposed a $10,000 homestead exemption in addition to the homestead exemption people in Alpharetta already get.
Correct.
So we have a significant number of projects that we want to get done as a city.
We do.
So tell me a little bit about just marrying the two, where you do want to give residents a break on their taxes, but we also have a revenue need for projects here in Alpharetta.
We have revenue neutral. So there are two things. And one thing that you'll find about me is that I am incredibly honest. Over the 4 years, what's going to be hard about delivering a homestead exemption is that Senator Albers has a 3% cap on what the digest can increase per year. So that makes $10,000 very difficult to do. If he weren't to do that in Fulton County and the tax commissioners would get their act together and assess my house for what it's worth, I could do a $10,000 homestead exemption in my sleep. But there are variables out there with his bill capping it. I know.
What do you think of that bill?
I think that bill is going to pass overwhelmingly, and I think that it's going to have a lot of public support, and I think it's wrong.
And I don't know the answer to this. Does it work both ways? Is it capped both for the positive and the negative?
I don't believe it's capped to the negative. But what I'll say this is if times are good, Fulton County, are you paying what your house is worth on property taxes? Probably not. Very few people are. And so if that would be accurately assessed, one, everybody would be happy. The Fulton County Commission would get turned over. They're elected officials, so you can't necessarily trust them to always do the right thing. That's just the truth. I mean, everybody they campaign for re-election, and they have to do that for 4 years. Well, they caught them in a pretty heated election cycle, and they screwed when they tried to true up property tax values. I mean, they took a lot of heat, and you had guys wanting to run for mayor in Atlanta. And you had a bunch of other variables that kept the integrity out of that process. And the truth is that although it's unaffordable, your house is worth what your house is worth. And so I know that it's going to pass overwhelmingly. I will probably vote no, just because I understand the inner workings of the millage rate and the things of that nature. But I don't think it's good legislation. Alpharetta takes tremendous.
Do you think it's honest legislation?
No.
I mean, who's going to vote?
I think it's popular.
Sure.
But
cutting taxes is popular.
Cutting taxes is popular.
Raising taxes is hard.
Raising taxes is really hard when you want to do it at a 50% increase. And they kicked the can down the road for years. It's still probably not back to what your house was worth in 2007, 2008. And I get rolling them back, but I have a lot of respect for Senator Albers, but I have tremendous disagreements with that.
So if you were in his position, what would be your alternative to that bill? If you are voting no for it.
I would force the tax commissioner to assess property values correctly. I would put legal ramifications, fines, and penalties to the county to get it right. And you can address these problems through a homestead exemption or a millage increase or decrease. But you have to you can't fundamentally do anything right if the initial assessment is wrong. That stands on its own. He knows. it's easy. It's hard. It's hard to necessarily do things the right way when you have to run for re-election every 2 years. And he's a guy who does things the right way. But, I've talked to Senator Beach about this, who's a very good friend and mentor and a guy I disagree with on plenty. I think serving in a local municipal, and I've talked to Kennedy about this, I think as a guy who, I think the legislators down at the Capitol who have served in a municipal government or a county government have a much better understanding of Main Street than guys who throw a bunch of money, knock on a bunch of doors. And that experience, although we hate to say we don't like career politicians, you having a guy like Mike Kennedy would never, and who I would vote for if he were to run for State House or Senate or Congress, I would never, he would never propose something like that because he understands the value of local control. So I know if that question came from him, and I have a feeling we've got a good cat and mouse game. Mm-hmm. We play with each other.
Okay.
I hope he comes on the podcast too.
Yeah, he's invited anytime.
Yeah, he should do that.
Have you let Senator Albers know how you feel about it?
I have. Yeah, I have, and it's difficult because populism is a tough thing to overcome. And who wouldn't, if you're of a registered voting block, who wouldn't vote to cap what you can raise your taxes? Like,
right.
When you run for office and you get in front of the press, you try to say popular things that no one fundamentally disagrees with. We're going to build a wall. And you have to say things that everybody can understand. Very few people in my neighborhood understand how a millage rate works. They trust me to know. But that's scary. But that's the truth.
Mm-hmm. They just pay their property bill once a
year.
year.
You mean I can cap my upside by 3% and I can, the downside has no limit? Okay, I'll vote for that. So if they get the assessments right, which they won't, we can absolutely do a $10,000 homestead exemption increase. It's hard to do a homestead exemption increase when public safety is asking for 10 heads and community development's overworked and public works is understaffed. But there's a conversation of integrity that's worth having. I don't know how much integrity is left leaving this city council with, less than $1 million of discretionary income to fill all those needs. There's a lot of ambitious things that have been done in Alpharetta lately that have really limited this council to take care of residents.
So that's a good segue because that topic came up a lot at the town hall you just hosted.
Yes.
At Harrington Falls Clubhouse. I showed up. I wanted to see what that was all about. We had, 26, 27 people there?
And they weren't planted.
No.
I was shocked.
I thought it was a good mix of demographic and area of folks here in Alpharetta. And I want to give you, first and foremost, credit for putting that on because you know how I feel about open government and access to your elected officials. So kudos. I hope you do more.
I will. I'm planning just to put it out on the mean streets. It's either going to be the April 22nd or 29th. I'm going to go to Hampton Hall or Tuxford or somewhere off Kimblebridge Road. My hope is that at some point, I don't do this. I mean, I've got 4 years. I don't have to. And my hope is that, one, it's educational so that people can understand how things work, like the yellow signs that so many people don't understand. But it's also, DC Aiken gave me great advice after I won and I was eating breakfast with him. And he said, every developer and every lawyer knows that they have access to you via email. Not every resident knows that. They feel that you're more unapproachable than you are. And I thought, how in the world do I... And I had a guy named Jim Burlow who lives, close to downtown. And he asked me if I'd put together a focus group. And he was very helpful to me all fall. And I said, you know what? I just want... Even if you want to come to the town hall to poke and prod because you don't like the way things are going, like...
That's what I signed up for.
Remember to be nice to me because I don't have to do it.
Sure.
And two, you don't want me to be jaded towards residents. That's not what I want. That's not what I signed up for. Mm-hmm. And I hope that as we roll these out all over the city of Alpharetta, I hope more of my council members choose to come. And I don't have an ulterior motive. I'm not running for office. And so my desire is to, and there are things that came up that I don't know what I'm walking into. And plenty of the times the answer to whoever's irritated or has a question is, I don't know. But, it was very obvious that people came from the west side of town to Harrington Falls. And I would like that to change. And I don't know how, but that's going to change. We'll figure it out.
Well, moving it around.
Moving it around, because I don't know. One of the things that really makes me curious to go to Hampton Hall or those subdivisions, I got absolutely murdered in that precinct. And I still don't really know why. And I want to, maybe those people like traffic. Maybe, you know what I mean? I don't know. But it's my goal, if I were to ever run for re-election, I told this to Donald, I've told this to Larry Addig, who I know didn't support me, but who's a great guy, he's a patriot of this country. My goal is to neutralize as many of those people as possible so that moving forward, they'd be like how I feel about Donald. I would support Donald if he ran for mayor down the road. I don't see that for me. That guy's been very impressive over the last, I'm proud of him.
So if you could accomplish one thing and one thing only in the next 4 years, what's at the top of your list?
I would like to see, from a residential perspective, Kennedy pokes at me all the time on this, and there's others that do too. Our elementary schools see enrollment declining. And I think that Alpharetta has done an incredible amount to incentivize and encourage empty nesters, renters by choice, to move downtown. And I understand the economics behind that, and that's what the market has dictated. But you can't continue to see decline in elementary schools. We have to have a better balance of growing families and people with kids to fill these schools. And I as homogenous as Alpharetta can be from a political circle, it is not from a citywide. You look at the racial makeup of Alpharetta, and it's a very diverse place. Mm-hmm. But
increasingly more so.
I would love to see beyond Alpharetta Elementary School, which you can argue is the only single-family home that's affordable to somebody who's 30, who's early career. And I don't know how to do that without creating an affordable housing, which I would never support. But we have got to figure out as a city how we can encourage more young families, not young professionals. We need to be able to see that trend with young families increase, because there are going to be less people in the workforce 10 years from now, and that's going to create real problems. If Alpharetta can get in front of that and to see an increase in our elementary schools, I think that would be really positive for Alpharetta for 15 years from now. I didn't campaign on that because it's too difficult to understand, but it's the truth. And while I'm at it, school enrollment is not declining in Alpharetta. It's just not. It's not true. Elementary school roll is declining.
I've seen stats that say otherwise.
From
Fulton County.
From Fulton County.
Yeah.
That say that Milton High School
It should be pretty easy to verify, right?
Milton High School is bigger. Cambridge is bigger. Well, Cambridge is new. You can take them or leave them. But, there's Alpharetta students that go to Johns Creek High School, that go to Centennial. It's a lot bigger, and there's a lot more to it than to just say, well, school enrollment's declining. And I had the numbers sitting with me from the last time they ran them. I got them from Katie Reeves, who sits on the school board, who I would believe knows.
Well, let's do this. We will get to the bottom of this. We should be able to verify this. And if you have more information, you can tweet at Ben Burnett, and let him know what information you have. And feel free to give him any feedback you had on this podcast. I think that's a great place to leave it. Councilman Ben Burnett, I'd like to thank you for being on the show.
Sure, we'll do it again soon.
And just want to encourage you to do more of those town halls. I think it's great for the community.
I will. I'll keep doing them as long as people... My biggest fear was that nobody was going to come, and it was rainy and nasty, and there were 26 people. You have to feel like if the weather's better, there's more.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, Ben.
This has been the Inside the Box podcast, North Atlanta's #1 local podcast. For bonus exclusive content, visit blackboxdocs.com. That's blackboxdocs.com. We welcome your feedback. Email us at pod@blackboxdocs.com.